hull breach tore through the cargo bay like a hungry mouth, spewing containers and equipment into the void. Dennis gripped the pilot controls as warning lights painted his face red in the dying cockpit. The jump had gone wrong. Something in the navigation system had failed, and now his ship was bleeding atmosphere while tumbling toward an uncharted planet below. He slammed his fist against the emergency protocols panel. The ship groaned in response, metal screaming as gravity took hold. Through the fractured viewport he could see green. Lots of green. A jungle world, dense and untouched by any civilization he knew of. The distress beacon flickered twice and died. Come on, Dennis muttered, fighting with the attitude thrusters. They sputtered, gave him a few seconds of control, then quit entirely. The planet rushed up to meet him. His mind raced through the cargo manifest, medical supplies, research equipment, and one live transport in the reinforced hold, the honey badger. He'd taken the job because it paid well, ferrying Earth animals to xenobiology stations across the sector. This particular passenger was headed to a research facility 3 systems away. Now they were both about to become permanent residents of nowhere. Dennis yanked the emergency lever beside his seat. Heavy blast doors slammed shut around the containment unit in the aft section, sealing it in a reinforced pod designed to survive, impacts that would turn the rest of the ship into scrap. He'd done all he could for his passenger. Now he had to save himself. The ship hit the canopy first. Branches thick as his torso exploded against the hull, slowing their descent but tearing away what remained of the wings. Dennis braced against his harness as the world became a spinning blur of green and brown. Something massive and solid caught the underside of the ship, flipping it sideways. He felt his ribs crack as the harness bit into his chest. Then everything stopped. Dennis hung sideways in his seat, breathing hard through the pain. Smoke filled the cockpit. His fingers fumbled with the harness release and he dropped onto what used to be the side wall. Every breath felt like knives, but he was alive. The emergency kit was still locked in its compartment. He grabbed it, forced open the escape hatch, and fell 3 meters into soft earth. The jungle was loud, not the peaceful sounds of earth forests, but aggressive noise. Things screamed in the distance. Something heavy moved through the undergrowth nearby, making the ground vibrate. The air tasted wrong, thick and sweet in a way that made his throat itch. Dennis pulled himself up against a tree trunk and took stock. His ship was destroyed. The front half had crumpled like paper, lodged between 2 enormous trees. The aft section had separated on impact, lying 50 meters away in a clearing. That's where the containment unit would be, if it had survived, if the honey badger was still alive. Dennis limped toward the wreckage, each step sending fresh pain through his chest. Probably 3 broken ribs, maybe 4. The emergency kit had basic medical supplies, but he'd need more than that to survive this place. He needed shelter, water, fire, and he needed to check on his passenger. Even though regulations said in an emergency situation, the pilot's survival took priority. The aft section had landed hard but mostly intact. Dennis found the containment pod wedged between twisted metal and torn insulation. The status light glowed green. Inside, through the reinforced window, he could see movement. Black and white fur, a low, rumbling growl. "Hey there," Dennis said, his voice rough. "We made it." Sort of. The honey badger pressed against the window, studying him with dark eyes. It looked angry, which was probably its default expression. Dennis had read the transport documentation. Honey badgers were fearless, aggressive, and tough enough to take on predators 5 times their size back on Earth. This one was female, about 10 kilograms of pure attitude and claws. He checked the pod systems. Life support was functional, running on emergency power. He could leave her in there, safe and contained, while he figured out their situation. That would be the smart move. The professional move. Something roared. In the jungle, close enough that Dennis felt it in his bones. Birds exploded from the canopy, fleeing in a wave of color. The temperature had dropped with the setting sun and shadows were growing long between the trees. Dennis looked at the honey badger again. She looked back at him, waiting. "Against my better judgment," he muttered, and released the containment lock. The door hissed open. The honey badger didn't charge out or run away. She stepped carefully onto the ground, sniffed the air, and immediately bristled. Her head swung toward the direction of that roar, and she made a sound Dennis had never heard before. It was part growl, part warning, all threat. "Yeah, I heard it too," Dennis said. He pulled a bent metal strut from the wreckage, testing its weight as a weapon. "We need to find shelter before dark. Can you understand me at all?" The honey badger turned to look at him, then back at the jungle. She took 3 steps away from the wreckage, paused, and looked at him again. Dennis followed. They moved through the undergrowth together, the honey badger leading in short bursts, always circling back to check on him. His ribs screamed with each step, but he kept moving. The jungle was getting darker. Things were waking up in the shadows, and none of them sounded friendly. The honey badger found a depression beneath a fallen tree, partially sheltered by massive roots. She sniffed around it, scratched at the ground, then looked at Dennis expectantly. He almost laughed. She'd found them shelter. "Good choice," he said, crawling into the space. It was barely large enough for him, but it would keep the wind and rain off. The honey badger squeezed in beside him, positioning herself at the entrance, guarding. As night fell completely and alien sounds filled the darkness, Dennis watched his unlikely companion. She hadn't run. She'd stayed close, found shelter, and now stood watch while he could barely move from pain. "Thanks," he whispered. The honey badger's ears twitched. Her eyes never left the jungle. In the distance, something screamed. The hunt had begun. Dawn brought new problems. Dennis woke to find 3 dead creatures piled at the entrance of their shelter. They looked like snakes but had 6 legs and mouths full of needle teeth. Each was nearly 2 meters long. The honey badger sat among them, cleaning blood from her claws with her tongue. She looked completely unbothered, like killing 3 alien predators in the dark was just another Tuesday. "You did this?" Dennis asked, though the answer was obvious. His ribs still hurt, but the pain had dulled to something manageable. He crawled out of the shelter and examined the bodies. The honey badger had gone for throats on all 3, quick kills. "You saved my life." The badger ignored him, continuing her grooming routine. Dennis dragged the bodies away from their shelter and took stock of their situation in proper daylight. The jungle was even more hostile than he'd thought. Everything grew in layers, fighting for sunlight. Plants with thorns as long as his fingers, flowers that hissed when his shadow crossed them, insects the size of his fist that buzzed past like angry bullets. The ship wreckage was their only resource. Dennis spent the morning pulling useful items from the debris. Emergency rations, enough for maybe 2 weeks if he was careful. A basic medical kit that he used to wrap his ribs, water purification tablets, a heat stick that could start fires, metal pieces he could shape into tools or weapons. The honey badger watched him work from a high point on the wreckage, occasionally disappearing into the jungle and returning with dead things. She was hunting, learning the area, marking territory. Dennis recognized the behavior from the transport documentation. She was adapting fast. "I'm going to call you Scrapper," Dennis said, sorting through a container of supplies. "Because that's what we're both doing now. Scrapping to survive." Scrapper made a huffing sound that could have meant anything. By midday, Dennis had built something resembling a camp near the aft section of the wreckage. The hull provided shelter from above, and he'd arranged metal panels to create walls on 3 sides. It wasn't much, but it would keep the wind and rain off. He found the emergency rations and opened one, surprised when Scrapper appeared at his elbow interested. "This is human food," Dennis said, showing her the protein bar. "Probably tastes like cardboard to you." Scrapper sniffed it, then looked at him expectantly. Dennis broke off a piece and offered it. She took it carefully, chewed thoughtfully, and swallowed. Then she sat down waiting for more. "So you'll eat my food, but you won't let me pet you?" Dennis asked, breaking off another piece. "Fair enough. Trust takes time." They ate together in the afternoon heat. Dennis chewed slowly, trying to make the rations last. Scrapper finished her portion and then dragged over one of her kills from the morning, presenting it to him like an offering. It was one of the 6-legged snake things, freshly killed. "You want me to eat that?" Dennis asked. Scrapper pushed it closer with her nose, then looked at him. The message was clear. She'd shared his food. Now he should share hers. "All right, but I'm cooking it first." He used the heat stick to start a small fire. carefully arranging dry wood he'd gathered from around the crash site. Scrapper watched the flames with interest but didn't back away. Dennis skinned the creature, finding pale meat underneath the scales. It smelled odd but not rotten. He roasted it over the fire until the meat turned white and flaky. It tasted like chicken mixed with fish. Not great but not terrible. Protein was protein. Not bad, Dennis said, offering a piece to Scrapper. She sniffed it, seemed offended that he'd cooked her kill but ate it anyway.
See? Fire makes things better. The afternoon passed in uneasy peace.
Dennis worked on the distress beacon, trying to repair it with parts salvaged from the ship's communication system. His hands were steady despite the pain in his ribs. He'd been a cargo hauler for 8 years, learned basic repairs because paying station mechanics cost too much. The beacon was fried, but the power cell was intact. If he could jury-rig a new transmitter, maybe someone would pick up the signal. Scrapper patrolled. She'd disappear for 20 minutes, then return and circle the camp before heading out again. Each time she came back, she'd check on Dennis, sniff around his work area, then leave. Establishing a routine, making sure he was safe. As the sun dropped toward the horizon, Dennis managed to get the beacon partially working. It hummed for 3 seconds, sparked, and died again. He cursed softly and set it aside. Tomorrow. He'd try again tomorrow. Something large crashed through the undergrowth to the west. Dennis froze, his hand going to the metal strut he'd kept as a weapon. Scrapper appeared from nowhere, positioning herself between him and the sound. Her body was low, aggressive, every hair standing on end. She made that warning sound again, deeper this time. The crashing came closer. Trees shook. Birds scattered. Dennis stood slowly, gripping his weapon, pain forgotten in the surge of adrenaline. Through gaps in the foliage, he caught glimpses of something massive. 4 legs, each thick as tree trunks. A head that swung low to the ground, tracking scents. Armored plates covered its back. It was heading straight for their camp. Scrapper, Dennis whispered. We should run. The honey badger didn't move. She planted herself in the open space before the camp, facing down a creature that outweighed her by several hundred kilograms. It was the stupidest, bravest thing Dennis had ever seen. The predator emerged from the tree line. It stood 3 meters tall at the shoulder with jaws that could swallow Dennis whole. Its eyes were small and mean, focused on the camp. On the food and shelter. On them. Dennis stepped up beside Scrapper, raising his makeshift spear. His hand shook, but he held position. Together then, he said quietly. The predator charged. Scrapper launched herself forward, a black and white missile aimed at the creature's face. Dennis ran left, drawing its attention, then jabbed the spear toward its flank. The metal scraped against armored hide but didn't penetrate. The creature swung its massive head and Dennis dove aside, feeling the wind of its passing. Scrapper was everywhere at once. She climbed the predator's leg, bit into the soft joint behind its knee, dodged a sweeping claw. The creature roared in pain and confusion. Nothing its size had ever been attacked by something so small and vicious. Dennis saw an opening. The predator's throat just beneath the jaw had no armor. He ran forward, ignoring his screaming ribs, and drove the metal strut upward with everything he had. It punched through scales and muscle, and hot blood poured over his hands. The predator staggered, tried to roar, and only gurgled. It swung one last time, its claw catching Dennis across the shoulder and sending him flying. He hit the ground hard, vision going white with pain. Through the haze, he saw Scrapper still attacking, climbing to the creature's head, going for its eyes. The predator fell like a cut tree. The ground shook with the impact. Dennis lay in the dirt, gasping. His shoulder was bleeding. His ribs felt like they'd broken all over again, but he was alive. Scrapper limped over to him, favoring her front left paw. Blood matted her fur, though Dennis couldn't tell if it was hers or the predator's. She sniffed his face, then collapsed beside him with a tired grunt. We won, Dennis whispered, his hand moving to rest on her back. For the first time, she didn't pull away. Good work, Scrapper. The honey badger closed her eyes, trusting him enough to rest. In the growing darkness, they lay together beside their kill, 2 survivors learning they were stronger as partners than they'd ever been alone. 3 days after killing the armored predator, Dennis woke to find Scrapper dropping a strange plant at his feet. She looked at him expectantly, then pushed the plant closer with her nose. The leaves were thick and blue, oozing a clear gel where she'd bitten through the stem. What's this? Dennis asked, sitting up carefully. His shoulder wound had gotten infected, red and hot to the touch. The medical kit's antibiotics were helping, but not fast enough. Fever made his thoughts fuzzy. Scrapper picked up the plant and placed it directly on his bandaged shoulder. The gel soaked through the cloth, and within seconds the burning pain began to fade. Dennis stared at the plant, then at the honey badger. She'd brought him medicine. Somehow she'd figured out which plants in this alien jungle could help. "Thank you," he said softly. Scrapper huffed and wandered off to continue her morning patrol. The distress beacon sat on his workbench, still refusing to cooperate. Dennis had spent hours rewiring it, testing different configurations, draining and recharging the power cell. Nothing worked for more than a few seconds. He needed parts he didn't have, tools that were scattered across the jungle floor, but he was getting better at surviving. The camp had expanded. He'd built a proper fire pit, fashioned a rain catch from hull panels, even created a drying rack for meat. Scrapper's hunting kept them fed. She'd learned which creatures were safe to eat and which ones made Dennis sick. They had a system now. Dennis spent the morning improving their shelter while Scrapper explored. She always stayed within calling distance, and twice she'd alerted him to danger before it arrived. He was learning her signals. The low growl meant predator nearby. The sharp bark meant something in the air. The quiet chuff meant all clear. Around midday, Scrapper returned and began acting strange. She paced back and forth, looking at Dennis, then toward the jungle to the east. She wanted him to follow. When he didn't move fast enough, she grabbed his pant leg and tugged. All right, Dennis said, grabbing his spear. "Show me." She led him through the undergrowth, moving fast but checking back to make sure he kept up. His ribs had healed enough that he could move without constant pain. The shoulder was better too, thanks to that plant gel. Whatever Scrapper wanted to show him, it was important enough that she was willing to lead him away from camp. They traveled for 20 minutes, climbing over fallen logs and ducking under low branches. The jungle opened into a rocky area where the ground dropped away. Scrapper stopped at the edge and looked down. Dennis moved beside her and felt his breath catch. Caves. Dozens of them, carved into the cliff face by water or wind or time. Dark openings that led deep into the earth, protected from rain and sun. Real shelter, the kind that could keep them safe through any storm. "This is perfect," Dennis said, studying the nearest cave entrance. It was high enough that he could stand inside, wide enough for a proper living space. Scrapper had already scrambled down and was investigating, disappearing into the darkness. Dennis climbed down carefully, testing each handhold. The cave entrance was cool and dry. Inside, the space opened up into a natural chamber about 5 meters across. The floor was flat stone, worn smooth. Water dripped somewhere in the back, a natural spring. It was everything they needed. Scrapper emerged from a side tunnel, apparently satisfied with her inspection. She sat at the cave entrance and looked at Dennis like she expected praise. "You found us a home," Dennis said, crouching beside her. This time, when he reached out slowly, she allowed him to rest his hand on her head. Just for a second before she pulled away, but it was progress. "We'll move camp tomorrow." "This is much better than the wreckage." A sound echoed through the jungle. Not animal, mechanical. Dennis froze, his heart suddenly pounding. He knew that sound. Shuttle engines. He ran to the cliff edge, looking up through the canopy. There, breaking through the clouds, was a ship. Not human design. The hull was smooth and curved, painted in colors that seemed to shift in the light. It circled once, twice, then descended toward the crash site. "They found us," Dennis whispered. The distress beacon must have worked after all. Sent out a weak signal that someone finally picked up. Rescue had come, Scrapper growled, watching the ship with suspicion. She didn't like it. New things meant danger in her experience. "It's okay," Dennis said, though he wasn't entirely sure. "They're here to help, probably." They made their way back to camp quickly. By the time they arrived, the shuttle had landed in the clearing. Its boarding ramp extended. 3 figures stood at the base of the ramp, studying the wreckage. They were tall and thin, with skin that sparkled faintly in the dappled sunlight. They wore environment suits and carried scanning equipment. Dennis stepped into view, raising his hand in greeting. "Hello, I'm the pilot. Thank you for responding to my distress call." The 3 aliens turned to him and he saw their faces through the clear helmets. They had large eyes, small mouths, and expressions he couldn't quite read. The tallest one stepped forward, speaking in a language that Dennis's emergency translator couldn't parse at first. Then it clicked, finding common ground. "Human survivor located. Condition appears stable." The alien's voice was smooth but lacked warmth. We are survey team from Trellin Registry. We detected weak distress signal. Are you injured? Minor injuries, mostly healed, Dennis said. I've been here about a week. The ship's a total loss, but I managed to... Scrapper emerged from behind a piece of wreckage, moving to stand beside Dennis. All three Trellins froze. The one who'd been speaking raised a scanning device defensively. Warning. Terran predator detected. Stand clear. We will neutralize the threat. No, wait. Dennis stepped between them and Scrapper. She's not a threat. She's with me. The Trellins looked at each other, clearly communicating through some channel Dennis couldn't hear. The lead surveyor spoke again, slower this time. Human, that is a honey badger. A registered dangerous species from Earth. You should not be in proximity. Our protocols require containment or elimination of hostile fauna. She's not hostile, Dennis said firmly. She saved my life. Multiple times. We've been surviving together. One of the other Trellins made a sound like escaping steam. Impossible. Honey badgers are aggressive, territorial, and attack without provocation. This creature should have killed you or fled. It cannot be trusted. Scrapper, as if understanding she was being insulted, sat down and began cleaning her paw. She looked utterly unconcerned with the aliens and their weapons. She's trusted me for a week, Dennis said. Watch. He moved slowly, deliberately, and placed his hand on Scrapper's back. She allowed it, leaning slightly into the touch. We're partners. She hunts, I build. She guards at night, I handle the technical work. We fought off a predator 3 times her size together. I'm not leaving without her. The lead Trellin lowered the scanner slightly. This is highly irregular. Our medical team will need to examine you for injuries and possible psychological effects. Survivors of crashes often form attachments to unlikely subjects as coping mechanisms. I'm fine, Dennis said, and she's coming with me to your ship. Both of us, or neither of us. The 3 Trellins conferred again in their private channel. Dennis could see the conflict in their body language. They wanted to help him. They also wanted nothing to do with Scrapper. Finally, the lead surveyor turned back. We can transport you both, but the animal must be contained in a secure hold. Regulations are strict. I am sorry, but this is not negotiable. Dennis looked down at Scrapper. She looked back at him, waiting to see what he would decide. He thought about the nights she'd stood watch, the food she'd brought, the medicine she'd found, the way she'd charged a monster 10 times her size without hesitation. They'd survived together. He wouldn't betray that now. Then make the hold big enough for 2, Dennis said. Because I'm staying with her. The Trellin's large eyes blinked slowly. You would choose to be contained with a predator rather than accept standard passenger accommodations. She's not just a predator, Dennis said. She's my friend. And yes, I choose to stay with her. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the lead Trellin made that steam-hissing sound again, but softer this time, almost like a laugh. Very well. We will prepare a shared containment space. But human, when we reach the station, you will have much explaining to do. No one will believe this. Let them see for themselves, Dennis said, reaching down to gather his few possessions. Scrapper helped, grabbing the bag with her medical supplies and dragging it toward the shuttle. The Trellins watched in obvious shock. As they walked toward the ship together, Dennis felt a strange sense of pride. They'd survived an impossible situation, and they'd done it by trusting each other when neither of them had any reason to trust. That was worth all the explaining he'd have to do. The containment cabin aboard the Trellin ship was larger than Dennis expected. 2 sleeping platforms, a waste facility, and enough floor space for Scrapper to move around. The walls were transparent from the outside, which made Dennis uncomfortable until he realized the Trellins wanted to observe them. He and Scrapper had become a research project. Comfortable? The lead surveyor, who'd introduced herself as Yala, stood outside the transparent barrier. Her voice came through a speaker, clear but artificial. The medical team wishes to examine you once we are underway. I'm fine, Dennis said, settling onto one of the platforms. Scrapper immediately jumped up beside him, checking the space for threats even though there were none. How long until we reach the station? 3 standard days. The station is Trellinhub 7, a commerce and research facility. We have contacted them regarding your situation. They are preparing quarantine spaces for the animal. She has a name, Dennis said. Scrapper. And she goes where I go. Yala's large eyes blinked in that slow way the Trellins had. The station administrator may not agree. Regulations regarding dangerous fauna are very strict. For everyone's safety. We'll see, Dennis said. Scrapper settled beside him, her warmth solid and real. After a week in the jungle, even this strange prison felt safe. The ship launched smoothly, leaving the green world behind. Dennis watched through the cabin's small viewport as the planet shrank to a dot. Their survival had been temporary, but they'd made it. Together. The 3-day journey was strange. Trellinhub crew members came to the observation window regularly, staring at Dennis and Scrapper like they were exotic specimens. Some took recordings. Others brought colleagues to see the human who'd befriended a Terran predator. Dennis tried to ignore them and focus on recovery. His ribs had healed well. The shoulder wound was clean, no more infection. Scrapper's injured paw had improved too, barely a limp left. They established a routine even in the cabin. Scrapper would patrol the space every few hours, checking corners and testing the door seals. Dennis did exercises to rebuild his strength. They shared the meal portions the Trellins provided, though Scrapper clearly preferred the preserved meat Dennis had brought from their camp. On the second day, Yala brought another Trellin to the window. This one wore different colors on his suit, more decorative patterns. "This is Administrator Kev," Yala explained. "He oversees Hub 7 and wishes to understand your situation before we arrive." Kev studied them with obvious concern. "Human Dennis, I have reviewed the rescue logs. You claim this creature is domesticated?" "No," Dennis said. "She's not domesticated. She's wild, but she chose to stay with me and I chose to stay with her. There's a difference. An important distinction," Kev said. "Wild predators are unpredictable, dangerous. Our station has families, children of various species. I cannot allow a Terran honey badger to roam freely. Surely you understand?" "I understand you're afraid," Dennis said. "But fear based on data files isn't the same as understanding. Scrapper and I survived a hostile world together. She protected me, brought me medicine, found us shelter. She's intelligent and loyal. Those files don't capture that." Kev was quiet for a long moment. "When we arrive, I will require a demonstration. Controlled environment. If you can prove this bond is real and stable, perhaps exceptions can be made. But if there is any sign of aggression or instability, the creature will be placed in permanent containment. This is my compromise." "Fair enough," Dennis said, though he didn't like it. Scrapper sensed his tension and pressed closer against his leg, offering comfort the only way she knew how. The third day brought new visitors. Not Trellins this time, but other species Dennis recognized from his cargo runs. A Rigelian with scaled skin and careful movements. 2 beings that looked like mobile plants, their speech translated into musical tones. They all came to see the human and his honey badger whispering among themselves. "You've become famous," Yala said during her evening check-in. "Word spread through our communications network. A human bonding with one of Earth's most dangerous animals. Many find it disturbing. Others are simply curious. What do you think?" Dennis asked. Yala tilted her head. A gesture he'd learned meant consideration. "I think I saw that creature position herself between you and perceived danger every time. I think she brought you food when you were weak. I think humans are either very foolish or very brave, perhaps both. Maybe we just see potential where others see threats," Dennis said. The ship docked at Hub 7 late in the third day. Through the viewport, Dennis could see the massive station, a wheel of metal and light spinning in the void. Ships of every size and design clustered around it like insects around a lamp. This was civilization, vast and indifferent. He'd missed it until now. Now it felt overwhelming. A security team met them at the dock, 6 beings in armor carrying stun weapons. They surrounded the containment cabin as if Scrapper might break through the walls. The crowd beyond the security cordon was even worse. Dozens of station residents pressing forward to see the human and his dangerous pet. "This is ridiculous," Dennis muttered. Scrapper growled low in her throat, not liking the attention or the weapons. Yala appeared at the cabin door. "Administrator Kev has arranged for a secure space in the station's center arena. You will demonstrate your bond there, before an assembly of species representatives. They will determine if exceptions to safety protocols can be granted." "So we're putting on a show?" Dennis asked. "You asked to be treated as partners rather than human and animal," Yala said. "This is how partnerships are verified in multi-species environments. Through demonstration of mutual understanding and cooperation. Be grateful." The alternative was immediate separation and containment. Dennis took a breath, pushing down his frustration. "Fine. Let's get this over with." They were escorted through the station in a security bubble, armed guards surrounding their transport cart. The crowd followed at a distance. hundreds of curious beings from dozens of worlds. Dennis heard the whispers, felt the stares. Scrapper stayed pressed against his leg, her body tense but controlled. She was scared too, he realized, just better at hiding it. The arena was a large circular space with seating rising in tiers all around. It was packed. Thousands of beings had come to witness this. Administrator Kev stood at the center with several others Dennis didn't recognize. One was massive, easily 3 meters tall, with red-scaled skin and armor that looked ceremonial. A warrior species, probably. The security bubble opened, releasing Dennis and Scrapper into the arena. The crowd noise was deafening. Scrapper's hackles rose, but she didn't run or attack. She stood her ground beside Dennis, waiting to see what he would do. Kev's voice boomed through speakers. Human Dennis and the Terran honey badger designated Scrapper. You claim partnership. We have assembled representatives from the Galactic Commerce Council, the Interspecies Safety Board, and various cultural observers. Demonstrate that your bond is genuine and stable. Show us cooperation and mutual trust. You have 1 standard hour. Dennis looked around at the crowd, at the representatives watching with skepticism or curiosity or fear. Then he looked down at Scrapper. She looked back at him, and in her dark eyes he saw the same thing he'd seen in the jungle when they fought the armored predator together. Trust. Simple and absolute. All right, girl, Dennis said quietly. Let's show them what we can do. He started simple. Basic commands that Scrapper had learned during their time together. Sit, stay, come. She followed each one, not because she was trained, but because she chose to cooperate. Then he moved to more complex demonstrations. He walked to one end of the arena. Scrapper stayed at the other. When he called, she crossed the space and climbed onto his shoulders, a position they'd discovered was useful for scouting in the jungle. The crowd murmured. The massive warrior leaned forward with interest. Dennis set up a simple obstacle course using equipment the station provided. Scrapper navigated it perfectly, occasionally looking back to make sure he was following. They moved together, anticipating each other's movements. When Dennis pretended to fall, Scrapper immediately rushed back to check on him, her concern obvious. Then Dennis did something risky. He lay down in the center of the arena, closed his eyes, and went completely still. Vulnerable. Scrapper circled him once, twice, then lay down beside him with her back pressed against his chest, guarding him, trusting that he wouldn't hurt her while trusting him enough to protect him. The silence in the arena was complete. After a long minute, Dennis stood slowly. Scrapper rose with him, shaking out her fur. In the jungle, she saved my life, Dennis said, his voice carrying through the arena. Not because I commanded her. Because she chose to. She's not my pet. She's my partner. And I'd trust her with my life again without hesitation. The massive warrior stood, his voice rumbling through the space. I am called Braun of the Ralgan warrior houses. I have seen many bonds formed in battle. Human, your choice of companion speaks well of your character. To choose a warrior as fierce as yourself, to fight beside rather than above. This is honorable. Kev looked uncertain but less skeptical than before. The crowd was divided, Dennis could see it. Some were convinced, others still feared. It would take more than one demonstration to change minds shaped by generations of safety protocols, but it was a start. We will deliberate, Kev announced. Human Dennis and Scrapper will remain in secure quarters until a decision is reached. As security led them from the arena, Dennis heard the arguments beginning above. Voices raised in debate about safety versus understanding, protocol versus exception. Whatever they decided, at least people were talking. At least they'd seen the truth of what he and Scrapper had become. Partners. In survival, and now in facing a galaxy that didn't quite know what to make of them. The quarters they assigned Dennis and Scrapper were better than the transport cabin, but still felt like a cage. 3 rooms this time, with actual furniture and a window overlooking the station's interior. Dennis could see the bustling commerce levels below, thousands of beings going about their lives. Somewhere among them, representatives argued about whether a human and his honey badger posed a threat. Patience, Yala had told him at the door. The council moves slowly, but they are fair. Your demonstration impressed many, including Braun. His voice carries weight among warrior cultures. 2 days passed. Dennis paced. Scrapper adapted faster, claiming the largest sleeping area and occasionally venturing to the window to watch the station activity below. They were fed well, better than the emergency rations. Station security checked on them regularly, always professional but clearly nervous around Scrapper. She ignored them with practiced indifference. On the third day, Dennis received an unexpected visitor. The door chimed, and when he opened it, he found himself face to face with 5 young beings from different species. They couldn't have been more than children by their proportions and the way they clustered together nervously. A Trellin youth stood at the front, flanked by 2 smaller creatures with fur and large eyes, and 2 others that resembled the plant beings he'd seen earlier. "Excuse us," the young Trellin said in careful standard language. "We know humans are not supposed to have visitors during deliberation, but we had to ask. Is it true? About you and the Terran predator?" Dennis glanced at the security guard stationed outside, who shrugged as if to say this wasn't his problem. "It's true. Do you want to come in?" The children looked at each other, then nodded. They filed in slowly, staying close together for safety. Scrapper emerged from the sleeping area, took one look at the visitors, and made a soft chuffing sound. Not aggressive. "Almost curious, that's Scrapper," Dennis said. "She won't hurt you unless you try to hurt us, which I'm guessing you're not planning to do." "No, sir," one of the furry ones squeaked. "We saw the demonstration in the arena. Our parents watched the recordings. They said it was impossible, that Terran predators cannot be trusted. But you seemed so calm with her." "I am calm with her," Dennis said, settling into a chair. Scrapper moved to sit beside him, and he rested his hand on her back without thinking. Several of the children gasped softly. "She's my friend. We survived together when we had no one else. That creates a bond that goes deeper than species or programming." The young Trellin moved closer, fascinated. "May I ask, how did it begin?" "The bond?" Dennis told them the story. The crash. The first night when Scrapper killed the predators, the medicine she found, the cave she discovered. He kept it simple but honest. The children listened with complete attention, occasionally asking questions about Earth or honey badgers or what it felt like to be stranded on an alien world. "Were you scared?" one of the plant beings asked in their musical language, translated by Dennis's device. "Terrified," Dennis admitted. "Every night." But Scrapper was scared too in her own way. Everything was new and dangerous. We were scared together, and somehow that made it easier. We had each other to rely on. The young Trellin reached out slowly, hand trembling. "May I touch her? I have never touched a Terran creature before." Dennis looked at Scrapper. "Your choice, girl." Scrapper studied the child for a long moment, then moved forward slowly. She sniffed the offered hand, considered, and allowed the briefest contact before stepping back. The young Trellin's eyes went wide with wonder. "She's soft," they whispered, "and warm. Not scary at all." "She can be scary when she needs to be," Dennis said. "But she knows the difference between a threat and a friend. That's intelligence, not programming or training. She makes choices." The children stayed for an hour asking questions and slowly losing their fear of Scrapper. By the time they left, 2 of them had been allowed to pet her briefly, and all of them looked at Dennis and Scrapper with something like admiration. "Thank you," the young Trellin said at the door. "We will tell our parents what we learned. That sometimes the files and regulations are wrong about what is truly dangerous." After they left, Dennis felt lighter somehow. If children could understand, maybe the adults would eventually follow. The next morning, Kev arrived with Braun and 2 other council members. Their faces were serious. "We have reached a decision," Kev announced. It was not unanimous. Many still believe keeping a Terran predator on the station poses unacceptable risks. However, a majority was swayed by your demonstration and subsequent observations. "We have decided to grant a conditional exception." "Conditional?" Dennis asked, not sure he liked that word. "You and Scrapper may remain on the station temporarily while we arrange transport to your destination," Kev explained. "However, Scrapper must remain under your direct supervision at all times. If there is any incident, any sign of aggression toward station residents, the exception will be revoked immediately. Do you understand?" "I understand," Dennis said. "It wasn't perfect, but it was better than separation." Braun stepped forward. "Additionally, the Ralgan delegation has made a formal request. They wish to study your partnership further, not as specimens, but as an example of cross-species cooperation achieved through mutual respect rather than dominance. They believe humans may have lessons to teach about forming unlikely alliances." "I'm not a teacher," Dennis said carefully. "You are now," Braun rumbled, his version of a smile showing sharp teeth. "Whether you intended it or not. Your story has spread beyond this station. Other humans in this sector have begun sharing their own tales of bonds with Terran creatures. You have started something interesting, Dennis of Earth. Over the following days, Dennis and Scrapper were given limited freedom to explore the station, always accompanied by security, always watched but free. They visited the commerce levels where merchants from 100 worlds sold everything imaginable. Scrapper stayed close to Dennis, overwhelmed by the noise and crowds but trusting him to navigate safely. They attracted attention everywhere. Some beings crossed the corridor to avoid them. Others stopped to stare. A few, usually members of warrior cultures or species from harsh worlds, approached respectfully to ask questions. Dennis answered patiently, explaining that Earth was a dangerous place and humans had learned to find allies in unexpected creatures. On my world, we have apex predators in every ecosystem, Dennis told a curious Ralgan warrior. We learned to respect them, sometimes fear them, but also understand them. Scrapper is fierce, yes, but fierce doesn't mean evil. It means she'll protect what she values with everything she has. Your people value this quality, the warrior observed. We admire it, Dennis agreed. Courage in the face of overwhelming odds. Loyalty that doesn't break under pressure. Those are human values too. Maybe that's why we understand each other. The attention wasn't always positive. One afternoon, a group of protesters gathered outside their quarters, demanding that dangerous fauna be removed from civilian spaces. Scrapper handled it better than Dennis, simply ignoring the noise while he felt his temper rise. Yella intervened, dispersing the crowd with firm reminders about council decisions. They fear what they don't understand, Yalla said afterward. Give them time. Already opinion is shifting. The children who visited you spoke to their families. Those families spoke to others. Change is slow, but it comes. A week after their arena demonstration, Dennis received a message from Earth's diplomatic corps. They wanted him to return home, bring Scrapper, and participate in a presentation about human-animal bonds for the broader galactic community. Apparently, his story had political implications no one had anticipated. You've made us interesting, the message explained. Not for our technology or our resources, but for our relationships with our own world's predators. That's a kind of soft power we didn't know we had. Dennis read the message to Scrapper while she cleaned her claws on his bunk. They want us to be ambassadors. Can you believe that? You and me representing Earth. Scrapper made a sound that could have been agreement or just gas. With honey badgers, it was hard to tell. The thing is, Dennis continued, I think I want to do it. Not for politics or power or any of that, but because maybe we can show people that different species don't have to fear each other. That working together is better than staying separate. A commotion outside their quarters drew his attention, shouting, the sound of running feet. Dennis moved to the window and felt his stomach drop. Smoke was pouring from a lower level of the station. Alarms began wailing and the lighting shifted to emergency red. Yalla's voice came through the room's speaker. Containment breach on level 9. Research specimens have escaped. Security teams are responding, but some creatures have reached civilian areas. All residents should shelter in place. Dennis looked at Scrapper. She was already at the door, bristling with readiness. She looked back at him and her message was clear. People were in danger. They could help. Kev said any sign of aggression and we're done, Dennis said, thinking out loud. But he also said Scrapper had to stay under my supervision. If I go to help, she comes with me. And if we save people, that's not aggression. That's protection, Scrapper barked once, impatient. You're right, Dennis said, grabbing his emergency kit and the metal rod he'd kept from the jungle. Let's go show them what partnership really means. He opened the door and addressed the startled security guard. We're going to help. You can try to stop us or you can come with us. Your choice. The guard looked at Dennis, then at Scrapper, then at the smoke rising in the distance. He made a decision. Follow me. I know the fastest route to level 9. Together they ran toward the danger while others ran away. Dennis felt Scrapper's presence beside him, solid and sure. They'd survived an alien jungle together. A station emergency was nothing compared to that. Whatever they found below, they'd face it the way they'd faced everything since the crash. Together. Level 9 was chaos. Research cages stood open, their locks melted by whatever had started the fire. Creatures from a dozen worlds roamed free, panicked and dangerous. Station security tried to contain them with stun nets and barriers, but they were overwhelmed. Civilians huddled in shops and offices, trapped while predators prowled the corridors. Dennis took in the situation quickly. 3 large creatures, each resembling the armored predator from the jungle, blocked the main evacuation route. Security couldn't get through and civilians couldn't get out. Smoke filled the upper sections, making breathing difficult. "Those are Krath beasts," the guard said, his voice tight with fear. "From a death world in the outer systems. They're used in combat training. Never supposed to leave containment. If they reach the civilian levels above, people will die." Scrapper was already moving, low and fast. She'd seen predators before. Size didn't impress her. Dennis ran after her, trusting her instincts. The security guard followed, probably out of shock more than courage. The nearest Krath beast noticed them and charged. 2 tons of armored muscle and rage, bearing down on a 10-kilogram honey badger who didn't have the sense to run. Dennis had seen this before. In the jungle, when that first predator attacked, Scrapper had taught him something important. Speed and aggression could overcome size if you didn't give your opponent time to use their advantages. Scrapper went low, sliding under the beast's guard and raking her claws across its unarmored belly. The Krath roared in pain and confusion, spinning to find the thing that had hurt it. Dennis ran in from the side, jabbing his metal rod into the joint of its front leg. The same tactic that had worked on the jungle predator. The beast staggered but didn't fall. It was tougher than anything they'd faced before. Its tail whipped around, catching Scrapper and sending her tumbling across the corridor. Dennis felt his heart stop, but she rolled to her feet immediately, shook herself once, and charged back in. Security teams saw what was happening and adjusted their tactics. While Dennis and Scrapper kept the beast distracted, they moved in with stun nets wrapping the creature's legs. It took 6 guards and both Dennis and Scrapper working together, but the first Krath beast went down. "The civilians," Dennis gasped, pointing toward the blocked corridor. "Get them out while we hold these 2 off." "You're insane," the security guard said, but he was already moving, organizing the evacuation. Dennis saw Yala among the civilians, helping coordinate. Their eyes met across the smoke-filled space. She nodded once, then focused on getting people to safety. The other 2 Krath beasts had noticed the threat now. They moved together, more intelligent than the first, trying to flank Dennis and Scrapper. This was bad. They couldn't fight 2 at once, not in this confined space. Then Braun appeared from a side corridor, accompanied by 3 other Ralgon warriors in light combat armor. "Human," Braun called out, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We saw what you were doing on security feeds. We came to help." "About time," Dennis said, grinning despite the danger. "We take the left one, you take the right?" "Agreed. Your little warrior, she is very fast. Use that, we will use strength." Braun hefted a shock staff, his warriors spreading out in practiced formation. The Krath beasts charged. Dennis and Scrapper moved as one, their jungle-forged teamwork taking over. Scrapper went for the eyes and throat, drawing the beast's attention upward. Dennis struck at legs and joints, bringing it low. They danced around the creature's attacks, never staying in one place, always moving, always striking. Beside them, Braun and his warriors demonstrated why Ralgans were respected across the galaxy. They fought with coordinated precision, their shock staffs crackling as they drove the second Krath beast back. But even they struggled against the creature's armored hide and raw power. "Switch," Dennis called out. Scrapper helped Braun. For a heartbeat, he thought she might not listen. She was locked in combat, focused entirely on their enemy. Then she broke away and sprinted toward the second Krath beast, understanding immediately what Dennis intended. If they divided the beast's attention, created confusion, they could bring both down faster. It worked. Scrapper harassed the second beast from behind while the Ralgan warriors pressed from the front. Dennis kept the first beast occupied, using every trick he'd learned in the jungle. Stay mobile. Strike vulnerable spots. Never let it pin you down. More security arrived with heavy stun weapons. The containment nets wrapped around both Krath beasts simultaneously. Electricity crackled through the nets and the massive creatures finally collapsed. The corridor fell quiet except for heavy breathing and the crackle of dying fires. The evacuation was complete. No casualties. Dennis slid down against a wall, exhausted. Scrapper limped over and collapsed beside him, panting hard. She'd taken a few hits, nothing serious but enough to slow her down. Dennis checked her over carefully, finding bruises but no broken bones. She tolerated his inspection, too tired to maintain her usual independence. "You fought well," Braun said, standing over them. His armor was scorched and dented, but he looked energized rather than tired. "Both of you. That was a warrior's work." "We just did what needed doing," Dennis said. "Exactly," Braun rumbled. That is what warriors do. Protect those who cannot protect themselves, face danger without hesitation. You and your companion, you embody this principle. The council will hear of what happened here today. Word spread fast. By the time Dennis and Scrapper made it back to their quarters, cleaned up and treated their injuries, a crowd had gathered outside. Not protesters this time. People who wanted to thank them. Parents whose children they'd helped save. Security personnel who'd fought alongside them. Even the young Trellin who'd visited earlier, now looking at them with open admiration. Kev arrived that evening with an official statement. The council has reviewed footage of today's incident. Your actions saved lives and demonstrated exactly the kind of cooperation and courage we should encourage, not fear. I am pleased to announce that all conditional restrictions on your partnership have been lifted. You and Scrapper are free to move about the station as you wish. Additionally, Kev continued, his tone warming slightly, I have been authorized to extend an official apology. We judged your bond by files and protocols rather than observing its truth. We allowed fear to cloud wisdom. You have taught us an important lesson. Thank you, Dennis said simply. Scrapper, curled up on the bunk nearby, opened one eye as if to verify that everything was acceptable, then went back to sleep. Over the next week, Dennis and Scrapper became unofficial ambassadors for a new way of thinking. Representatives from various species came to speak with them, asking about Earth and its dangerous creatures, about how humans learn to coexist with predators, about the philosophy behind forming bonds across species barriers. It's not complicated, Dennis explained to a group of xenobiologists. We respect them. We don't try to control them or change them. We understand what they are and work with that reality rather than against it. Scrapper is fierce and stubborn, and sometimes she completely ignores me. But when it matters, when real danger comes, we trust each other completely. That's the foundation. The message from Earth's diplomatic corps came again, more insistent this time. They wanted Dennis and Scrapper back home for that presentation. But now there were other offers too. Research institutions wanted to study their bond. Warrior cultures wanted to learn from their tactics. Even peaceful species showed interest, seeing how cooperation could bridge seemingly impossible gaps. What do you think? Dennis asked Scrapper one evening, watching station traffic through their window. Home or something else? Scrapper tilted her head, considering. Then she moved to the door and scratched at it. She wanted to explore, to see more. Home could wait. Yeah, Dennis said, smiling. I feel the same way. They decided to accept Earth's offer, but with modifications. They'd present to the galactic community as requested. But then they'd travel, visiting other worlds, showing beings across the galaxy that differences didn't have to mean division, that a human from a death world and a honey badger could find common ground, so perhaps entire species could do the same. The transport to Earth was comfortable, nothing like the cramped containment cabin from before. They had proper quarters, freedom to move about the ship, and crew members who'd stopped seeing Scrapper as a threat and started seeing her as the ship's unofficial mascot and guard. Dennis stood at the viewport as Earth grew larger ahead of them, blue and green and beautiful exactly as he remembered. Home, where humans had learned to survive alongside everything from lions to crocodiles to honey badgers, where they'd developed not just technology but understanding, not just strength but respect. They're going to want to know our secret, Dennis said to Scrapper. How we made this work when it shouldn't have been possible. Scrapper made a sound that was half grunt, half purr. She didn't care about secrets or politics or galactic implications. She cared that Dennis fed her regularly, let her explore, and fought beside her when danger came. Everything else was just noise. You're right, Dennis said. It really is that simple. We survived because we chose to trust each other when we had nothing else. Everything that came after, the fighting and the traveling and the attention, that's all just details. The important part is we're still choosing each other. Every day, the ship began its descent. Below, humanity waited to meet the cargo hauler who'd crashed on an alien world and come home with an unlikely partner. They'd want to celebrate it, analyze it, turn it into policy and protocol and cultural exchange programs. Dennis would let them. Because if his story with Scrapper could help people see past fear and into possibility, if it could show that bonds could form across any divide when built on trust and mutual respect, then the weeks in that jungle had been worth more than just survival. The landing was smooth. Dennis gathered his few possessions while Scrapper paced by the door, eager to smell new territory. When the door opened, They stepped out together into flashing lights and crowds, and questions shouted over one another. But through the chaos, Dennis saw other humans with their own companions. A woman with a rescued wolf, a man with a great horned owl perched on his shoulder, a group of children with a reformed python coiled peacefully among them. Earth's unlikely partnerships, all gathered to show the galaxy what humans had learned from sharing their world with creatures that could easily kill them. We don't conquer our world, Dennis thought, watching the crowd. We make peace with it. We find allies in unexpected places, and that's why we'll succeed out here among the stars. Not because we're the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced, but because we know how to build bridges where others only see divides. Scrapper pressed against his leg, solid and warm and real, ready for whatever came next. Together. Come on, girl, Dennis said, moving forward into the crowd. Let's show them how it's done. And somewhere above, the galaxy watched, learning that humanity's greatest strength had never been about weapons or technology or even adaptability. It was about the simple, profound ability to see potential for friendship even in the fiercest of creatures, and to honor that friendship with unwavering loyalty. Dennis and Scrapper walked forward together, two survivors who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and built something beautiful from it. Their story was just beginning, but its lesson was already spreading across the stars. Trust is earned, bonds are chosen, and sometimes the greatest partnerships come from the most unlikely places.